In order to draw an entity, we first need to specify the coordinates or locations of geometric features. We already mentioned in an earlier tutorial that in CorelCAD we first specify values and coordinates for an object, and CorelCAD will then draw the shape or entity based on the values that we've entered. Now, there are two methods of specifying geometric features, and we're first going to look at doing this using the keyboard and the mouse. Using the keyboard we can enter specific numbers, distances and angles, etc. And the mouse will show us the location within the drawing. Before we actually begin entering coordinates, there's a couple of things we need to know. So how do we specify coordinates? Although entering XY coordinates is very common in CAD programs, it's not the only way, and CorelCAD supports a variety of coordinate types. Up until now, when we've been entering commands in our command prompt window, we've just been simply using the mouse cursor to click in the window to specify starting and continuation points. However, we can give precise XY coordinate values, and in CorelCAD we use a comma to separate the distances or separate the XY coordinates, and we use an angle bracket to signify angles. We can of course also give minus y and minus x coordinates if we are going down the minus y and minus x axes, and we can also enter a minus value of course for our angles. Positive angles are measured counterclockwise from the x-axis, although the direction can actually be reversed with a units command. And also when we begin to enter values, we are using what is called absolute coordinates, and this means that coordinates always refer back to the absolute 0, 0 xy coordinate here. But in this tutorial we're also going to go on to speak about relative coordinates and polar coordinates, for example. So we're going to start by drawing a line, so I'm going to enter the line command and hit enter. I'm now asked to specify the starting point, and I'm going to choose -10, -10. And again I'm going to hit enter. Don't worry at the moment where the cursor actually is. You can see that the fixed end of the line is actually starting at -10, -10. So let's continue. I want the next point in my line to be at +10, and I'm going to hit enter. And again we can see I now have a line. Cursor's waiting for me to define the next point, but the line I have at the moment started at -10 and is now finishing at x + 10. We're now going to move on to relative coordinates. By placing an @ symbol in front of a coordinate in the command window, we can measure distance and angles relative to the last point picked in the drawing. So as you can see here, the last point is the point symbolized by the blue cross here. And by entering a relative coordinate, I'm basically saying that this last point in my drawing has now become my new xy 0, 0 coordinate point. Now the line we've drawn so far has ended, or the last drawing point is at +10x +10y. If I want to continue drawing now, I'm going to actually enter some new values, and these values will be drawn relative to the last point in my drawing. So I'm just going to go down here, and I'm going to first of all type in the @ sign, and I'm now going to add a new value. I'm going to add 10 and 20 and hit enter. And what's happened now is that my last drawing point is now counted as the 0x point. So I've said x is 10. So we've now moved along 10 here. So x10 is here, and we've ended at y20. Now this is not the actual absolute coordinate, x10, y20, but it's relative to this starting point here. The next type of coordinates we want to take a look at are polar coordinates. Polar coordinates are described as distance and angle, and the best way to try to imagine what a polar coordinate is to imagine that you're at the North Pole and you're trying to find a point on the Earth at a specific distance from the North Pole and at a specific angle around the North Pole. We create a polar coordinate by entering a distance and an angle. So we'll start by entering our line command, and we're now going to set a point. This is our origin point, and from this point we're going to specify a distance away from this point and at a specific angle. So I'm going to start with 25 and at an angle of 45. So here is the point that we have now defined. We can also use polar coordinates in a relative sense. So if I now type my @ sign and I type another distance and another angle, I've now, relatively speaking from my last starting point, I've now described another polar coordinate at a specific distance and a specific angle. I'd finally like to mention two other types of coordinate systems. We have the cylindrical coordinates, where we use the values x, y and an angle. And when thinking of cylindrical coordinates, imagine a cylindrical can where x in this case is measuring the radius of the can, the y-axis is measuring the height of the can, and the angle measures the angle around the can. So typical values would look in this case something like this. And then we also have spherical coordinates, and spherical coordinates are created using distance and two angles, and this is basically a 3D version of the polar coordinates. In this case, imagine that the point of origin is the centre of the Earth. D for distance measures the distance from the centre, A measures the angle left and right around the equator, basically the XY plane, while the capital A angle is measuring the angle up and down along the international data line, so the Y and Z planes. And in this case, the data values that you enter would look something like this. You can, of course, also use the cursor to show CorelCAD locations in drawings. And in this case the mouse controls the cursor. The problem with this, however, is that using a mouse is not particularly accurate by itself. For example, if you imagine trying to draw a 30 centimeter in diameter circle using just a mouse, that would be quite difficult. And for this reason, CorelCAD provides several aids for more accurately drawing with the mouse and with the cursor. This method of determining the position of our entities is called direct distance entry. So we start by entering our line command, and now we click in the drawing space where we want the line to begin and move our mouse roughly at the angle that we're aiming for. And now back in the command line we type distance, enter, and now we type the distance we want this line at this angle to be drawn. So let's say 30. And what we've done here is we've now drawn a line which is moving from our starting point at a distance of 30 at a particular angle away from the point of origin that we designated.